Hi, readers. Today, I'm going to lead you through a read aloud, and I'd like you to participate by either having some post-its nearby that you can share with me in an email or submit to Google Classroom, or I want you to have Google Keep open. Right now, decide how will you do this. Will you take notes by hand with post-its, pen, or will you have Google Keep open? Regardless, you need to be prepared to share your jots with me at the end of the session today. So this read aloud is a short story, and it's called The Save by best-selling author Joseph Bruchac. And he writes everything from poetry to fiction to nonfiction. He writes the works. And in this story, we're going to be hearing about a character named Oren, who's what you'd call a third string lacrosse player. So that means that he's an athlete, but he's not the first person even off the bench. He's like the second or third person off the bench. And that's significant to him and also maybe kind of troubling for him because his grandfather was an all-American lacrosse player, meaning he was not only the best in his team, but he was like the best in the United States. He's one of the top players ever. And in the story we're going to be reading today, Oren finally gets some time on the field during a really big lacrosse game. And so today, as we take on this read aloud, we're going to be carrying with us some of the work we've already started, considering who we are and what we bring to stories. Let me just remind you of some of the stuff that we've been thinking about over the last few days. Every reader brings something different to a story. There might be 2 of us or 30 of us that read the same story, but we'll each find that we bring something different the story in front of us because we bring our own story when we read a new story. We bring our identity to our reading, which shapes our perspective, understanding of the text itself. And so today, I want to remind you to continue thinking about your identity and your perspective, and to continue doing some of this really big work, this metacognitive thinking. We don't just think about the characters and let ourselves get lost in the world of the story, really get inside the skin of the characters and live life through them. Rather, think about them as how they relate to or how they don't relate to us as individuals. That means thinking about whether or not the story or elements of the story are either serving as a mirror, showing us our own identity or pieces of it, or a window, showing us someone else's identity. And as we read today, I want you to just be checking in with yourself as a reader and as a person. Who are you? What are you bringing to the story? And how are you able to connect to or not connect to the story and the elements of the story? So we're going to get started. And remember, we're going to be thinking deeply about character first, because that's our first giant unit of the year. It's a deep study of character in fiction texts. So without further ado, let's get started. This is The Save by Joseph Bruchac. Oren shifted the stick from one hand to the other. Usually that was no big deal. Right now it felt heavy as a sledgehammer. Even with the mask on his face, his padding, and his gloves, he was feeling naked. The goal behind him was the standard 6 feet by 6 feet, but it seemed as big as a barn door now, that he was the one guarding it. In front of him, in their various positions, ranged 9 other Onondaga boys on their team. Paul Hemlock, who had the wingspan of an eagle and who was even taller than their coach, was to his right. Paul's face, as usual, looked serious. even though he was always the first to crack a joke after the game was over. To Oren's far left was Billy Croce, who was always grinning. He was much faster than he looked, and their best defender, Perry Elm, the third defender and closest, turned to look over his shoulder at Oren. No worries, Perry said. We got this. No one's getting past us. Oren nodded. He was actually on the same field with these guys, in a real game. His heart should have been pumping with excitement. He'd finally been given the opportunity to play the position he'd practiced for so very long. Instead, what he felt inside his chest seemed like a lump of lead. Now pause there for a second. I'm already noticing that this author uses a lot of figurative language. Are you noticing that? Let me just go back and remind myself, what did I hear that sparked that thought? He said things like a lump of lead. So that might mean like lead is heavy. So maybe something that's heavy, not moving a lot. Take a look at the page on your end. What else do you see? Are there other examples of figurative language? Things being compared that maybe are exaggerating the truth? Things that are being compared to show and describe? Let's keep looking and see, what might the author be doing? Why is the author using figurative language, and what does it do? What does it serve the story? Why am I so upset? Nothing was at stake now. They were ahead 14-2. Only 2 minutes left. No way we can lose. No way. He mouthed those words for the fourth or maybe fifth time. No way we can lose. No way. That was why he, the third string goalkeeper, had been given a chance to look like a bum. Let me just pause and remind you that a third string player is definitely not the starting player on any team, not just lacrosse. It could be a third string player for soccer, for basketball, for football. If you're a third string, it means you're not the first one you're not starting the game. You're also not even the first one off the bench. You're the third person up. So usually a team will put in a third string player when there's no doubt that the team will win. So when you're put in the game as a third string player, like how Oren is, yeah, it's exciting, but maybe it also feels, as we're kind of noticing, bad. Like a reminder, oh, they don't need me, right? They don't really, need any big assistance, so I can play. I can kind of sense that from Oren, and I'm wondering if maybe he's not excited because he just feels like, even though it's a chance to play, it's also a reminder that he's not very good at the sport. The team they were playing, the Buffalo Bulls, actually wasn't that bad. His own guys were so far ahead because they had gone on a mad scoring streak. Although, to be honest, his team also was winning because they were a whole lot better. After all, the Bulls weren't Buffaloes at all. They were just city kids. He'd bet none of them had ever set foot on a lacrosse field before they hit middle school. How many of them had held their first stick before they could even walk? How many of them had a grandfather like his, who was a legend and an All-American? And not one of those kids on the visiting team was Indian. While we invented the game, we are the Iroquois. We are the Iroquois. We're proud. We are strong. That's how Joanne Shenandoah sang it on his mom's favorite CD. How it sounded on the playlist on Oren's own iPhone. It was sort of a corny song, but it usually inspired him way more than Jay-Z's latest rap. I'm going to pause there and come back to some of my questions from earlier. Is this story a mirror? Are you seeing yourself? Are you seeing a life that looks like yours? A character that reminds you of yourself and your own experiences? Or are you seeing something that's a bit different from yourself? Maybe a mirror, a window into another life, a window into another experience. I don't know about you, but I feel pretty mixed about this. So, for instance, I've never played lacrosse in my life. I know what it is. I grew up in a place where people definitely played lacrosse. And I also grew up in a place where it was pretty segregated as a sport. For instance, I grew up in a place where there were city kids who played who didn't start playing until they were in middle school, who were kind of like brought to the game, like they were like brought into the game a little bit later. And there were kids who were brought up in the game. Maybe they were Indian. I grew up in a place where there were Indians, American Indians. But there also were people who had been playing for years who had no relation to the game at all. So I can relate to this story, not personally, just I've seen situations like this before. This kind of like weird divide among people playing lacrosse and people feeling like some people own the sport and some people don't, or some people created a sport and some people didn't. Maybe you've never heard about this before at all. Maybe this is totally new. It's definitely a window. A little bit of information about lacrosse. It was started by American Indians. It was invented by the American Indian people. And the Iroquois is the name of an American Indian tribe, specifically the tribe that invented the sport of lacrosse. So, sounds like our main character, our narrator, is actually a descendant of the creators of this game. So, as I realized that, I'm thinking I definitely have no connection yet to this character. I definitely feel very different already from this character. I'm not American Indian. I don't really know that much about American Indians. But he's making references to things I do know. Like I know what the iPhone is. I know Jay-Z. I used to listen to him when I was a teenager. Definitely his hit was coming out with the latest raps then. I know lacrosse. I know people who play lacrosse. Let me keep going and see. What kind of a story is this and how is this going to fit into my life, my identity, my perspective as a reader? Iroquois. Iroquois, we're Iroquois. And everybody on our team is head and shoulders above these guys, except me. For some reason, even though he was trying to concentrate, his mind wandered back to when they were showing him those Buffalo kids around. Maybe because he was a third stringer, he'd been one of the members of his team delegated to be a tour guide. And a way to make him feel more useful, he guessed. He almost laughed, remembering the reactions of those city boys when they were given the short tour of the res before the game. Res is short for reservation, a place where American Indians have been forced to live because of our history, because of the mistreatment of American Indians in this country. The best moment came when they were taken up onto the hill to see the tribal buffalo herd grazing on the yellow autumn grass in the wide field. Wow, one of the kids said, the stocky boy who turned out to be their overmatched goaltender. Those are realer buffaloes than we are, said the kid who'd been standing next to Oren. He was tall and lanky. Rajat was his name, the only name Oren seemed to remember from among them. There was a sort of British accent in the precise English he spoke. Oren had liked him for his politeness. Then he liked him even more for the sense of humor he showed. Again, when he leaned over toward Oren and said, I too am Indian, but of another sort entirely, transposed, you might say. He flipped one hand over the other. American Indian, Indian American. A third kid, whose hair was cut so short it looked like a newly mowed lawn, reached out to pluck one of the heavy braided steel cables strung between the iron girders. that served as posts for the fence around the field. "Do they ever get out there?" he said. He sounded nervous. "Yep, yep," said Bill Jimerson, the keeper of the herd, who was leading this part of the tour, "but only when they want to." That was when the buffalo everyone on the res called Big Guy. The largest male in the herd decided to show his sense of humor. He spun around and charged, hooves pounding like a powwow drum, straight at the gathered crowd, nostrils flaring, head down. His snorting was loud as a trumpet as he thudded toward them. Again, I hear figurative language. Do you? Comparisons to a powwow, also comparison to a trumpet. I'm thinking that the author is using comparisons, using figurative language to help describe things in the story so I can better picture them, but also to describe it in a way so that I feel unfamiliar. For instance, I can recognize a trumpet. So if something sounds like a trumpet, I know what that sounds like. I've heard the trumpet before. I've played it with myself before. But a powwow drum, maybe I don't know what that is. Maybe it's put in there to make me feel distant from the story, but also connected at the same time. Right now, what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to jot. I'd like you to jot about your connection or your disconnection to the story. Again, you can either use a Post-it or you can open up Google Keep. And I'll just give you some reminders by showing you my note-taking sheet of what you can be thinking about in your jot. Is this story so far a mirror? Are you seeing parts of yourself? Are you seeing things you recognize and can identify with? Or are you seeing more of a window? Are you seeing into somebody else's life? Are you seeing somebody else's experience that's entirely different from your own? I want you to specifically think about characters. Can you relate to the characters? Yes? No? How so? Or how do you not? What about the setting? Do you remember where they are? It sounds like they're on a reservation. And it sounds like they have lacrosse players visiting the reservation. So I'm starting to think that they're on a reservation, they're in a place that has buffalo. The kids who are visiting are lacrosse players who are getting a tour. Never seen a place like this before. So who's in the story? Where are they? Can you relate? Right now, I'd like you to make your first jot. You can title it Jot number 1 and put the date. 99/23 or 9/24, whichever day it is you're doing this. Take your first jot. I'll give you another moment to do that. And keep reading. Remember, when we read The Crowd is Blue, at first we all were having moments where we felt really disconnected and different from the characters in the story. But then as we got to know them better, we found that there were actually more things there that were in common than we thought. So I'm wondering if that's going to happen here. Maybe it's going to be the kind of thing where the circumstances, the situation itself is different. Like the people are different, the characters are different, setting is different from what we know. But then the feelings the characters have, maybe those will be recognizable. Let's read on to see if that is true. To their credit, not all of the Buffalo Bulls and their various coaches and chaperones ran or tripped over their own feet as they tried to flee. As usual, Big Guy stopped inches away from the fence, his hooves throwing up clods of dirt and brown grass as he skidded to a halt. Then he lowered his head so that Bill Jimerson could reach through the fence and scratch behind his horns. Can you picture this? Like a giant animal, a buffalo, giant, way bigger than a cow, bigger than a bull. It's just lowering down to this man, letting him scratch him behind the horns. Imagine being like a city kid who's never been on a reservation before, never seen these kinds of animals, and just seeing this giant creature show up and cozy up next to some guy. No problem at all. How would you feel in that situation? I'd be like pretty scared. I'd be like really taken aback. I believe, said Rajah, who remained next to Orrin, that this one does not wish to get out yet. The visiting lacrosse kids recovered quickly. Wow, said a thin, long-armed kid whose sweatshirt had a design of crossed sticks and the number 10. He was shaking his head and smiling as he stepped back up to the fence. That is how to charge the goal. Sounds like they're talking about lacrosse. Remember at the very beginning where they're talking about like playing goalkeeper, or he was talking about playing goalkeeper and defending the goal? I don't know, it's interesting. It feels like a situation that has nothing to do with lacrosse, but now we have this guy, this kid, this lacrosse player who's comparing something that feels so, to me it seems so different to something that feels really similar to his everyday life, like something he knows well. It's like me comparing like going to war, which I've never done, to going to teach. I do that every day. It definitely is not the same thing at all, but I'm making it like personal to me. Is that a fair comparison? Is going off to battle the same thing as going off to teach? I don't know. I feel uncomfortable saying that out loud. Makes me feel like this comment might be uncomfortable too. You bet, Masterson, said the slightly shorter boy by his side. Like his friend, he stepped back a few paces, but hadn't fled for his life when Big Guy, the big creature, the buffalo, mock charged. So he fake charged at them as if he was kind of like playing a joke, this animal. And the kids seemed like they're kind of wary about it, but kind of nervous. The shorter boy's sweatshirt wore a large number 7. Number 7. A whistle sounded. Wake up! Warren looked up the field. Wait a second. What's happening? Have you ever seen this in a story before? You're reading. So like we started off, let's just like go through what we've seen and heard. Started off on the lacrosse field. He's thinking about how he's the third string player. He's like, yeah, cool, I'm playing, but it means I'm not very good at lacrosse. Then we're all of a sudden on the reservation where the kids are visiting. It's like the day they showed up and met him for the first time. And now where are we? We're back on the lacrosse field. What was that? What would you call that? Flashback. It was a flashback. So just like how the author is using cool craft moves like figurative language, making comparisons to things we know and we don't know, the author's also doing a cool craft move called flashbacks. Why? Seems like a good idea for your next job. Why would the author include a flashback? How does this flashback back to the reservation, back to where he meets his teammates for his new lacrosse team? Why would this be important to the story? I'm going to read a little bit more, and then I'm going to give you a chance to jot about it. Owen looked up the field. The ball had been put back into play. There actually were a couple of pretty darn good players on that Buffalo team, numbers 10 and 7, the two kids who'd admired Big Guy, Buffalo. The fastest of the 3 attackers. They'd scored the only goals, 1 each against Lee Elm, his team's second string goalie. Those two scores were impressive. Lee was almost as good as Phil Mohawk and would for sure be guarding the next year, the net next year after Phil graduated. So it's like the rising players are playing in this game. The next generation or the next class of athletes, the future goalies, the future defenders are out there on this field in the story. Number 10 and number 7, both of them were now heading Oren's way at a fast lope, passing the ball back and forth between them. He bet they were setting up some variation of the plays they'd scored on before. Be a Panther in the goal. That was how his grandfather and namesake put it to him. I'm realizing something here. I'm realizing now that there are 2 teams. I was thinking before that it was just one team, maybe like this main character Oren had a team full of people that were unlike him. But now I'm realizing that he is a team of people from his reservation, thinking that he is a team of other American Indians. And they're all on the reservation playing this other team from the city. That makes things pretty interesting. So we have a group of lacrosse players who have no cultural association with the game of lacrosse, playing a game of lacrosse players who are American Indian, who are totally connected to the game and history of lacrosse. That, I feel like, might cause a bit of tension, don't you? Let's read on to see. Be a Panther in the goal. That was how his grandfather and namesake put it to him. Oren crouched. He could feel his heart beating now. It was pounding so hard it was as if an eagle were trying to fight its way out of his chest. Numbers 10 and 7 were crisscrossing in front of him, trying to draw him one way or the other. Oren stayed in his crouching down in his goal. A panther, be a panther, he thought. Number 10 had the ball. Masterson, Oren remembered. That's his name. Yeah, so I think that the kids who showed up are showing up on the reservation in the city to play the kids who are from the reservation. So it seems like, to me, this is kind of like a tense game for a lot of reasons. It's almost like American Indians versus Americans. Lacrosse versus like history of lacrosse. Pretty big deal. Everything was in slow motion now. Masterson was reversing his stick to make a shot over his back shoulder. Oren had seen him work that move with success twice before. The ball was about to leave the webbing just as number 7 charged Oren. Oren tried to leap. The cross stick extended to stop the shot. But as he did so, his feet crossed and his legs tangled together. At this exact moment, when number 7 ran into him. So one kid is making the shot, and the other kid basically knocks him out. That's a nasty move. You probably maybe have seen that in football. I'm thinking about the times where I watch football games, and like you see people attack like that, like kind of like attack the quarterback or the person making the play. Feels like it's a pretty dirty move to attack the goalie, the goalkeeper. Oren flipped midair and landed flat on his belly. They took him out. He flipped. He couldn't move. The wind had been knocked out of him. I don't know if you've ever had that before. One time I was on a trampoline when I was a kid, and I flew up on the trampoline and onto the ground, and I had the wind knocked out of me. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. You know what I'm realizing? I might have small mirrors in the story. I might have some small moments in the story that I've connected to. Do you? So right now you're thinking about like what your next jobs could be, and they give you more ideas, and and they remind you of these ideas that are coming up. But you were thinking a lot about like, are you connecting to the story, parts of it, feelings the characters have, situations they're in? And so are you connecting to maybe the conflict, the stress of the moment? What do you make of it? What do you make of these two different groups of people playing this historic game in this historic place? What about the craft moves that the author is using? Those pieces of figurative language, making those comparisons to things we know and we don't, the flashbacks. So right now there's a lot of things going through my mind. I hope there's a lot of things going through your mind too. The craft move that the author is using to capture the story, to tell the story. The connections we're able to make or not make. And also the story itself, these characters, the setting, the tension. Three giant things to think about: identity, craft, and story elements. Get ready, because we're going to be jotting some in just a moment. Read this part again. You're thinking, you're paying attention, maybe pick a lens. Do you want to focus on identity? Mirrors, symbols. Do you want to focus on craft, figurative language, flashback, maybe descriptive detail too? Or do you want to focus on the story elements, the characters, the relationships between those groups, the setting, where they are, why it's significant, tension, problem that all this creates? Pick one. We're going to read on a bit more, and then you're going to jot. Orrin flipped in midair and landed flat on his belly. He couldn't move. The wind had been knocked out of him like a piece of bubble wrap tomped on by a boot. I really am a bum, was all he could think. He gasped, struggling to regain his breath. Maybe you're relating to this moment. Maybe you've had the wind knocked out of you. Maybe you felt awful because someone dragged you into a game, dragged you into a moment. Maybe someone tried to include you, but really made you feel just not included, excluded, isolated. Oh, so much is happening at once. What is it? What is it? What are you going to relate to? Is it the identity part? Is it the craft part? Is it the story element part? You're thinking. Keep going. A whistle sounded. The game was over. People were shouting, "All right, what a move! Great!" They're praising that goal scored while I was belly flopping, Orrin thought. Then he realized the voices were those of his own teammates. And it was not just his own guys who'd been impressed. Number 10 and number 7 were leaning down on either side of him. Man, number 10, Masterson, said as the two Buffalo players lifted him to his feet. That was amazing. Orrin looked down at the stick. He was still clutching with his left hand. There, held in the webbing, like an eagle's egg in its nest, was the ball. He saved the goal. After all of that, he saved the goal. What? Pause. Right now, we are all jotting. I am jotting, you're jotting. Remember, you have some things you can be thinking about. I'm going to remind you. You can be thinking about identity, like how we've been thinking about all along. This stuff. Thinking about identity. You can be thinking about story elements. Here, and I'll make another little post on the side because we don't have enough room. About craft, authors, craft, narrative, craft. You're thinking right now to yourself, what do you want to jot about? What have you been thinking about the most? I'm saying description here. I'm just going to zoom on this one so you can see. Because I don't know about you, but Yeah, figurative language has really stuck out to me, all those beautiful comparisons, but and also that those flashbacks or that one giant flashback that felt significant. Because the language in this is so descriptive. Like I felt like I was also being belly flopped. Did you? I felt like I also landed on my stomach. I felt like I also was like gonna just break inside of humiliation for being put in a game I knew I shouldn't have been part of. The description this author uses is so vivid. Makes me just feel like I'm part of it. So what do you want to write about? Do you want to focus on identity work? Do you want to focus on story elements? So picking one of these things to write about that you're noticing. Focus on pick one right now and write a jot on Google Keep or on a post-it. This one should be a bit longer. I'm going to start mine, you start yours. And write to me what you are writing about. You're writing, you're writing. And when you're ready, you're going to keep reading on with me. Make sure you have a full jot. You should have 2 jots by now. You should have 2 full jots. Remember, you're going to be submitting these either on Google Keep or taking a picture. So you have 2 full jots. Before you head forward with me, make sure you have a second full jot written down. Fear held in the webbing, like an eagle in its nest, was the ball. Coach White was patting him on his shoulder. Oren, my man, you may be Phil Slot next season. The coach said, I should tell everyone it was an accident, Oren thought, but he didn't. How would he do that? He would tell everyone it was an accident when he made this incredible save. How would he do that? Why do you think he feels that way? You want to write something down? Are you thinking about characters? Maybe now you want to start thinking about characters? Why would he do that? This character is pretty complicated, don't you think? It's inner thinking. Sometimes it contradicts or conflicts with what's happening outside. Interesting. My door is always open. That was what his grandfather always said to Oren. I'm also realizing that sometimes we don't have a giant flashback. We have like flashback memories or flashback moments. This is not the first time the grandfather's words have been mentioned, right? It's happened a few times before. Maybe now you want to switch to think about flashbacks, fractions. And it was. When Oren got his grandfather's cabin, the door wasn't locked, but his grandfather wasn't there. There was a note on the door. Gone to council meeting. Come on in. Food's in the fridge. Oren pushed the door open and went straight to the fridge. He was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing off his 4th piece of fried chicken when his grandfather arrived. Skeno, his grandfather said. It was the old greeting, a word that simply meant peace. Skeno, Owen replied. Leave me any of that, bird? His grandfather said, chuckling as he pulled up a chair and reached for the plate. Not much, Oren admitted. No problem, his grandfather replied as he picked the meat off the one wing Oren had missed. Plenty more at Firekeeper's. Still hungry? Oren nodded. These days, he was always hungry, probably because of that growth spurt his mom said he was about to have, which would likely end up with him being taller than his Uncle Lee. That growth spurt couldn't come fast enough, as far as Oren was concerned. He was tired of being half the head shorter than the other boys on the team. Ready? His grandfather said, standing up and gesturing with his chin at the door. Born ready. Orrin replied. The two of them set off walking. It wasn't that far to Firekeepers, no more than a mile. It was the restaurant where everyone on the res liked to eat, even if the four-lane road that had been cut a generation ago through their community was only 200 yards from the parking lot. After all, it was Indian-owned and served fry bread, almost as good as his mom made. They sat at their usual table, so usual that the waitress, one of the teenage Thompson twins who looked so alike Orrin could never tell them apart, brought out the plate of fried bread, 2 bowls of buffalo chili, and 2 glasses of water without their having to order. Anything else? Mary, or Margie, said, wiping her hands on her apron. Nope, his grandfather said. Yahweh, Yahweh, Orrin said, echoing his grandfather's thanks. The fried bread and chili vanished about as fast as a gravy squirrel scooting around a tree trunk. They sat there for a while in companionable silence. Wish I could have been at the game today rather than the council meeting, his grandfather finally said, looking out the window to their right, where one of the Jemison boys was trying to start his stubborn three-wheeler. Heard you made a great play. Orrin shook his head. He'd hoped his grandfather hadn't heard about it, but he should have known. News of anything you did, whether good or bad, traveled around the res at warp speed. No, Orrin said. His grandfather didn't say anything. He just looked at Orrin, raising an eyebrow. Orrin took a deep breath, and he explained it all. How it had been nothing more than a happy accident. How he felt like a fraud. How he didn't deserve any praise at all. His grandfather just listened. Then he waved at the waitress behind the counter. Hey, Margie, he said, got any of that herbal tea? Coming up, Big-O, she replied. His grandfather smiled at Orrin. Know how to tell them apart? Orrin shook his head. Mary is the one with the beauty mark on her right cheek. Margie's is on the left, and half an inch bigger. His grandfather sipped his tea. Outside in the parking lot, the Jemison boy was banging the motor of his ATV with a wrench. Orrin waited. There was no point in trying to rush his grandfather. He watched as the old man finished his tea, sighed, and then lifted his right hand to rub his chin. What was it you intended to do other than stop that shop? He said. And what did you end up doing? Gramps, all it was, Orrin said, was dumb luck. His grandfather shook his head. I think it was more than that. I watched you practice. You have good reflexes. Sometimes we can do things that surprise even ourselves. Plus, what's wrong with luck? If I had to choose, my goal would be to have somebody on my team who's lucky any day of the week. Orrin stood up. He wasn't sure why. Maybe just that it was hard for him to sit and listen to his grandfather's words, trying to convince him he wasn't the loser he knew himself to be. What happened next was hard for even Orrin to explain. Just that there was a loud bang and a spurt of fire from the Jemison boy's ATV, followed by something whizzing through the air toward them, and that somehow Orrin found himself flying like a big cat right over the table, knocking his grandfather to the floor as a shard of sharp metal spun over their heads. Gramps, Orrin said, jumping to his feet, looking down at his grandfather, lying on his back. Are you okay? His grandfather smiled up at him. Better than I would have been if that hit me, he said, looking toward where the piece of metal was buried in the restaurant wall. Suddenly, there were people all around them. You see what that boy did? I never saw the like. His grandfather held out a hand and let Orrin help him up. Well, he chuckled. No way, grandson. Thank you. Remember what I said about you having good reflexes? No way, are you going to feel bad about this save? I guess so. Warren grinned. What are your thoughts? What are your reflections? Take a second right now. Maybe just walk yourself back to the story. Just take a second to sit, think. I'm going to do the same. Okay, so now for your final piece. You're going to show me that you were listening, that you were with me, that you were paying attention, and that you were thinking deeply the entire time. Choose a lens. Either choose to continue thinking about identity. We've done a lot of that work, so if you're ready to, you can move to something else if you're ready. But I secretly think that no matter what you do, it's going to come back to identity anyway. So you can choose to reflect on big picture identity. Were there elements in the story that you felt like you could connect to? Were there elements in the story that you felt like you couldn't connect to? Were there moments, experiences, feelings that you felt like were mirrors to your own life? Or was most of this just a window into somebody else's? Maybe even giving a story about how this connects to you or how it doesn't. Number 2, talk about the story elements. What did you learn about the characters? What thoughts did you have about them? The important thing here is that you're sharing with me your thinking about the story element, not just a retell of the story elements. I know the story. I'm not looking to see what happened. I'm not looking to see who the characters were. I want your opinions, your thoughts, your feelings about the characters and the relationships, the setting, the problems. Maybe you even connect the dots this way. How does the setting connect to your life or not? How does the problem or problems faced connect to your life or not? And finally, you could write about narrative craft. You could write about figurative language. For instance, you could write about the many metaphors and similes. The wind had been knocked out of him like a piece of bubble wrap, which is one example of the many. The flashbacks, the moments where the main character thinks to his conversations with his grandfather, or thinks back to the day or a few days before. Descriptive detail, all the details used to really bring the story to life. What effect did it have on you as a reader? What effect does it have on the story as a whole? Once you've picked one of these for your final jot, I want you then to submit it along with all the other jots that you haven't yet. My hope is that you really, at this point, can use Google. So that means you're going to just write another jot in keep.google.com. You're going to add me, and then you're going to share it with me so that I can see it. And if you, for some reason, are not able to do that still, you should just take a photo of your jots that you did by hand and then send them to me in an email or just submit them on Google Classroom. Okay, friends, if you need support with this, remember to check Google Classroom for the charts to remind yourself of what you can be thinking about. And I look forward to not only seeing your thinking, but getting to talk to you about this when we resume our full class again soon. I hope you enjoyed. I love this story, and feel free to reread it on your own as many times as you like, with or without my read aloud voice.